It's tie breaks at the Grand Chess Tour here in Superbet Chess Classic Romania. Praggnanandhaa drew his first tie-break game against Alireza Firouzja. MVL also drew his tie-break game against Firouzja. And now it's Pragg versus MVL. It was a three-way tie after the classical format. And now, in order to determine who takes home the title, we have the Blitz tie breaks of 5 minutes plus 2 seconds increment. Essentially, we have boiled down to this scenario that whoever wins this game wins the title. In case of a draw, we have further Armageddon games, but if Pragg or MVL manage to win, they are the champions. So everything to play for here, a lot at stake, and Pragg will be definitely looking for another title after winning the Tata Steel Chess earlier this year. Handshake, and we are ready to go. Knight comes out to f3, and MVL pushes his pawn to c5. c4 played, the symmetrical English on the board. Knight to f6, knight to c3, knight c6. We have the four knights. Pawn takes, knight takes, and now e6 played. He pushes his pawn to g3, queen b6, attacking here, and knight d b5. The knight jumps to e5. This is all well-known theory. Bishop g2. Taking the pawn here is possible. Then queen a4, I think, is the mainline theory. The other move here in this position is a6. You can see MVL pausing a bit, trying to recollect his lines, making sure that he doesn't go wrong in the early part of the opening. And this is a very, very sharp line. In fact, sometimes you even go and attack this pawn on f2, but actually not here because I can simply castle. That happens when I try to defend this pawn, let's say with bishop f4 and now knight f g4. But here bishop g2 by Pragg, giving up this pawn, and I think MVL, he goes a6, Pragg instantly responds with knight a4. So Pragg playing super quick, knowing the opening theory. Queen goes back, check, bishop takes, queen takes. And now the knight takes the pawn. Pragg goes queen c5. In fact, there's a very well-known game here between MVL and Dubov. Dubov played with white against MVL this line, and that's the reason why I believe Pragg is blitzing out his moves. He knows this game. Queen a3, and in that game, MVL had played queen d7, which is one of the best moves in the position. Will he repeat that? Is the big question. MVL decides to change. He goes bishop c6, and you can see Pragg pausing there. And now the important thing to note here is, why is white better in spite of being a pawn down or having the compensation? The reason is the dark square weaknesses. White can move the queen away, and then the bishop can come out and take control of this diagonal. So castles, and then next move queen c3, bishop a3 is possible. So MVL plays queen e7, trying to trade queens. If queens are traded, I think black is very happy here in general, and it would make a lot of sense to keep the queens on the board, especially because black cannot castle next move. Let's say, for example, I go queen c3. You cannot really short castle here because then I go bishop a3. That's the problem. So short castle, bishop a3, you lose an exchange. While Pragg taking his time here, he has a minute's edge on the clock, and he plays queen c3, the best move in the position. A tough position here for MVL, especially in a blitz game, is how do you deal with this bishop a3 move? It's such a powerful move. Maybe you want to go queen d7. Oh, he sacrifices a pawn. That's a very interesting solution here by MVL. He's giving back his pawn in order to gain the time. So now bishop c6, bc6, and queen takes d4 is possible. Pragg is thinking whether he should take on d4 or should he take on c6 first. He would love to keep this bishop a3 option. So for example, let's say take and queen f3 makes a lot of sense. But now there is castling, bishop a3 and c5, and black is better here. So cannot go in this direction. But should you take, should you play queen d4? Some questions for Pragg here. And I think he has fallen behind MVL's time here. He takes on c6, b takes c6, takes on d4, and now castling here. Bishop b2 would be a nice move. Also queen e3 with the idea of bishop a3 is possible. The only problem is maybe I can go c5 and then the bishop isn't doing much on this diagonal. So Praggnanandhaa decides to put the bishop on the other diagonal, pinning the knight here. And my understanding here is that after h6, Pragg might want to take, and this position should be very, very even. I think black should be able to hold this without much difficulty. So h6 does make sense here. And with 3+ minutes on the clock, a player like MVL should not have any problems holding such a position. MVL is thinking hard here. Maybe rook f d8 is also a nice move. He plays c5, attacking the queen here. And Pragg can move the queen, but look at this move. Bishop takes f6. So if you take with the queen, I can take the pawn on c5. It's a pawn that can be taken. And Pragg does take it. And MVL takes with the g pawn. Well, slightly weakening the king here on g8. Pragg decides to give a check. King h8. Rook b1. Now this rook can actually enter down on the b7 square. So for example, if I can get queen f3 and rook b7 with the other rook coming to b1, it would be super strong. And MVL now trying to figure out what is the best way to coordinate his pieces. He goes rook d8, taking the open file. And queen f3 seems like a possibility. Also taking the d file with rook f d1. There's also rook b3 to f3, swinging the rook there. Pragg plays rook b2. I think he stops his opponent from coming on the 7th rank and himself doubling on the b file. 2 minutes 14 seconds for Pragg. 2 minutes 11 seconds for MVL. What a neck-to-neck encounter. The thing is, if this game also ends in a draw, we will then have an Armageddon between second and third placed players, and then the winner would meet the first placed player there in the tournament. Will it reach that stage? For now, it looks very likely because the position is equal. Rook b8. Nice move by MVL, trying to trade a pair of rooks. I like how Praggnanandhaa is super zoned in. He's trying to see if there's any minuscule edge that he can create here. He plays rook b1, check, takes on d1, and MVL takes on b2. Now, the rook is super active. Rook takes a2 is hanging, rook takes e2 is under pressure. But on the other hand, if Pragg's rook just finds its way onto the last rank, it's game over. That's how good that's how brutal the check threat is. So h4 played by Pragg, trying to play h5, h6, maybe f5 by MVL. And maybe queen f4 makes a lot of sense. Well, queen g5 absolutely makes no sense because after the queen trade, black is better with the active rook. So keeping the queens on the board, very important. Queen f4 with the idea of queen e5 check is a good one. Pragg does go queen f4, king comes up to g7. The question of course is, can black chop off these pawns? He can, but this king being weak always puts him under pressure. If h5 now with the idea of h6, there is h6 for black. So if queen e5 check, there is queen f6. e4 played by Praggnanandhaa. Very interesting move. He's trying to break apart this structure here. And not so easy for black to react. Well, MVL, I think he wants to move his queen here to f6 maybe. Let's say queen f6, ef5, queen f5, queen takes, pawn takes. That looks like a bad structure with rook d5. But then maybe rook a2, rook here, taking on c5. White will be a pawn up, will have some pressure. So these calculations not easy. MVL therefore takes on e4. But this allows this little check here, queen g4 check. Pushing the king to the last rank. Maybe king f8, slightly safer to bring the king towards the center. But he plays king h8, which is also fine. Now takes on e4. Queen comes up to f6, which is very nice, attacking f2. Queen e3, defending f2, attacking c5. And now should MVL take on a2? He's taking his rook there. He takes the pawn. Queen takes c5, king g7. Oof. I think coming back queen e3 and then pushing your rook up is a great idea. Pragg does it. Queen e3. Very careful. MVL must trade. Rook a1. And the game would be equal then. It's a nice move to exchange the rooks. He has 1 minute on the clock. Must not get super ambitious by pushing the pawn to a5, a4. It takes a lot of time and white rook can simply move up. And the rook and the queen can launch a very deadly attack. But MVL, oh yes, he wants to play rook. No, he goes rook c2. Maybe not the best move there. Rook d4. Pawn to h5, stopping this move. Rook g4 check. And now a very important move here for Pragg is king g2. Because if you play rook f4, I think Pragg is surely calculating this. King g2, rook c1. There's no check here to the king. Rook g1 coming to smoke the king out. And so maybe good to prepare. Yes, he finds it. King g2. Good move by Praggnanandhaa. And now the most important move, rook e2. If queen takes, queen d4. That should be tried. But MVL pushes a5. That's a terrible move because rook f4 now. He finds it. Queen c3. Offering a queen trade, but queen a7 is winning. There's no way to defend the f7 pawn. He finds it. And MVL resigns. What a finish. There's no way to defend this pawn. Praggnanandhaa beats MVL. You can see MVL shaking his head there with a glass of water. He resigned with a smile, but what a day for Praggnanandhaa. He's won the tournament. He's the Superbet Chess Classic 2025 champion. And it all was decided in the last couple of moves. This amazing rook lift, rook d4, f4, and then the f7 point being too weak. Congratulations to Praggnanandhaa.